All right, hello everyone, welcome. I hope you enjoyed this workshop. I've created this whole presentation based on questions you've been asking me and with tips for beginners. So I think we should get started. This is a beginner's guide, but not only a beginner's guide, it's also a guide for creating great animations because we don't want to like just do random animations. We want great animations. So let's get started. Animation is the art of bringing things to life. That's how I fell in love with animation. The first moment that I created an idol and I saw the character kind of breathing and coming to life, that for me was very magical. And I think this is the what is super like appealing about animation is that you can bring life into anything, objects or characters or creatures or whatever. So and it's easy to learn. It's actually pretty simple. Like it's not that hard. Like it's no rocket science getting a character moving, but it's hard to master because it's not easy to have good quality animation. So I've separated some tips in here for you. It all starts with the rig. The first thing before animation, we need a good rig to start with. Because some motions you won't be able to achieve without a proper rig and without a proper setup. So I won't get into rigging in here because this is not about rigging and it is a completely different topic. But I just want to uh, show you the importance of having a good rig and a very good setup before you start, because otherwise you limit your motions and you limit what you can do if you don't have a good setup. So what makes a good animation? As I said, it all starts with a rig, of course. But I think what makes good animation is that it should be believable. And how you achieve that, it's by having a good knowledge of the principles of animation and body mechanics. Because the thing is, animation, especially character animation, we see people moving around us all the time. So we are kind of used to seeing what that looks like. And whenever you see something that is kind of different, your eye will recognize that, your brain will recognize that, and it will like you identify that immediately. So the trick to a good animation is it should be believable. Another thing, it should convey emotion, because I think actions, like I said on yesterday's spaces, actions speak louder than words. So most of the time, you have to express yourself, at least in animation, without any sound or without any other um, technique like a text or something to show what you're feeling. So you gotta be able to show the emotion through movement. That makes a good animation. Another thing is fluidity, because like I said, our eyes can notice bumpy and broken movements. Like even if it's just a frame, you might not know what's causing this weird feeling when you see an animation, but you know there's something that's not right. Your brain is certainly going to focus on that, and you know there's something wrong. Maybe you can tell what's wrong, but you can't see. So, and the last topic, what makes a good animation? Of course, there are a lot of other things, but I chose this for me personally. I think these are the most important things. The animation should tell a story. So it should be easy to read. If your movement is unclear, like if it's hard to understand what's going on with that animation and that movement, you're probably not doing it. I wouldn't say not doing it right, but you could get it better, like better poses, better timing, and yeah. So that's what makes good animation. And the common mistakes that I've noticed throughout my years as an animator is we can't blame it all on the rig, though, even though a bad rig can make our life pretty tough, but we can blame it all on the rig. So common mistakes is the uncanny valley. We all know that uncanny valley is that something doesn't look right, or it's some kind of bizarre, it doesn't feel natural. So what causes this is bad overall movement, lack of reference, a lack of knowledge of the principles of animation. I'm going to go through the principles of animation later, but This is the kind of things that might cause your animation to look a little broken. Another thing that I see a lot is the wrong timing. So I call it the zero gravity effect. Like when you like your animation doesn't have the proper weight, like everything's happening the whole time in the same speed. This all creates a very boring animation. If you don't have like this variation in speed and your character just feels like it's floating in outer space. So unless this is the intention, of course, but this is usually what makes your animation boring. Another thing is poor arc tracking. Arcs are really important because they will be responsible for creating the fluidity of the movement. And usually, what I see is people they don't they don't have the knowledge of arcs, or they are not aware that they should be tracking how the movement is developing, and this causes robotic and awkward movements like maybe it's going too fast when it shouldn't, or maybe it's going too slow when it shouldn't, or maybe it's just like I said before, very linear speed and it's just boring animation. And the last one is lazy animation. So what I see sometimes people focus on the torso animation, legs, and all that, maybe arms, but hands usually go unposed, neck goes unposed, heads go unposed. So it's important, like when you're animating, to spend the time and work on all the bones and work on the motion. These little details make a lot of difference. So I've realized, like through the years, there are two struggles that beginners deal with. One is related to the software and rig, and the other is related to the principles of animation. So basically, one is the tool, and the other is the concept. For the software and rig, I usually see the lack of knowledge because, I mean, these softwares are a challenge and can be hard to learn for some people. The learning curve can be very steep for some people, and also the rig because people are not they're not used to know what a rig should let them do, or what are the features that a rig should have. They don't access all the potential of the rig, let's put it like that, limiting their animation a lot. And related to the principles of animation, the lack of knowledge of these principles will have a great impact on the quality of the animation. Um, Mostly the end result, what I've realized throughout the year is that the software is limiting, like it stands like a limitation, but what affects the quality most of the time is the principles of animation. Let's move on. Like I said, most mistakes are a result of lack of knowledge of principles of animation and movement mechanic. So I'm going to go through these principles of animation that I've been talking about since the beginning of this workshop. But before that, I want to go through some basic animation concepts because for people who have been working with that for a while, it might be very straightforward, but people who are not used to this vocabulary and concept, it can get very confusing. So frames, what are frames? Are the units in a timeline. Like frames in a movie, like you have a sequence of frames. The frame is the unit. A keyframe. Keyframes are markers used as anchor points for actions. So for example, in a timeline, you have many frames. Let's say you have 100 frames. You can, but you don't necessarily need to have 100 keyframes. Keyframes are set for like you wanna like record or save a certain pose. So you're gonna tell the software, okay, save this pose, and it's going to create a keyframe with all that information of rotation and location and everything related to how you manipulated the bones. The frame rate, or the FPS, is the number of images we see in every second. So this will define the speed of animation. The lower the FPS, the choppier the animation will be. And the more FPS that you have, the animation will be more fluid. So for our standard, we usually work with 30 FPS in Decentraland. For remotes, the default is 30 FPS. And keyframe animation is the animation done manually. Like this is my specialty. Like the keyframe animation is when you manually do all the movement. You don't use motion capture for anything. It's just like the animator doing every movement themselves and using the knowledge of body mechanics and the mechanic behind movements in general. So, oh, and also there's the FK and IK that I also keep talking about all the time. So for those of you who don't know, there's two ways to animate things. One mode is the FK, which we call forward kinematics, which is pretty much like you have to rotate each bone to achieve the desired result. It works pretty much like an action figure where you have to move every part of the body to pose it in a certain way. And we have the inverse kinematics, which is the opposite. When you move only one bone, the rest of the chain will move accordingly. And I like to associate this like a marionette, like you pull the strings and you move the hand. You don't have to rotate the whole arm to get that motion. But I won't go much further into this. I think the documentation covers this very nicely. If you have any questions about this, I suggest going to the documentation related to the rigging, and there you'll find a lot of the rigging concepts that I won't go much further into. So before we start, something that I always say is reference is everything. Don't underestimate the power of a good reference. Before you start anything, it's important to make a habit to do some research. For example, if I had before, I had to in a previous job that I had to animate an armadillo, and I had no idea how to do that. And so I started searching a lot of things about armadillos, how they moved, how their bodies, or what type of armadillo I wanted. Like there are many different species, how armadillos swim, how armadillos walk, how armadillos do stuff. Because we don't know, we can't know everything. And especially because there's something interesting. I don't know if you heard about it, but there's an experiment where people were asked to draw a bicycle without any reference, just with the image of bicycles they had in their heads. And everyone managed to draw a bicycle, but only very few people got it right. The middle part of the bicycle, all the bicycles had like two wheels and all that, but when it came to the middle part of the bicycle, no one got it right because we have a vague idea of what a bicycle is, but we don't have it like the fine details. It pretty much happens with movement. You see people walking all the time, you see people moving all the time, but if you're asked to reproduce it in a 3D software, you're probably going to do it wrong. You don't have the idea of where or how to put the weight, where to put the weight, when the transfer of the weight happens, which leg goes first, which arm goes first. So this is really important. I really, really insist that people start always with good reference and gather as many as you can, because this is not only fun, but you learn a lot about movement in general during this process. So let's go through the principles of animation. There are 12 principles in total. They were created by Disney animators, and they were first mentioned in the book The Illusion of Life from 1981. The principles were derived from what they had observed working on the Disney animations and how the animators achieved the perfect movement. So let's go through all of them. Here's a list of all of them. I'm gonna go into each one individually and explain a little bit about them. But mainly it's squash and stretch, anticipation, staging, straight ahead action and pose to pose, follow through and overlapping action, slow in and slow out, arc, secondary action, timing, exaggeration, solid drawing, and appeal. Some of these principles are not very relevant for 3D since they were mainly created for 2D animation. But still, there are things that we can bring to the 3D and like just translate to the 3D software as we go through it. So squash and stretch is the first one. I think a lot of you might already know this. Maybe you don't know the name, but you know how it is like when you want something bouncy and flexible. We usually use this to add flexibility and gravity and weight to something. This is not you don't have to do this in your animations because the more you exaggerate this, it's going to look very cartoony. We have this in, like, for example, the hug emote from Grimy, and there's also, I think, the butt bounce. He usually uses this technique on his animations, and I think this is really cool because it gives this fun addition to the movement. Remembering that when it squashes, it needs to get thinner because you have to maintain the volume. So when it squashes, it needs to go thinner, and when it stretches, it needs to. Oh, it's the opposite. When it stretches, it needs to go thinner, and when it squashes, it needs to get wider in order to preserve the volume. The anticipation is very important because this is a preparation that you do before any movements. So, for example, I chose the Carnival Muse emote because you can notice that before she does the spin, she does this preparation. And this is not only necessary for movement, but also it shows the viewer what to expect next. So she's posing, and you know she's going to the other side. She's going to spin in the other direction. So this not only makes the action more realistic, but it also prepares the viewer for what's about to happen. This is very common in jumps. It's very obvious, like you can't jump with your legs straight. You're gonna bend your knees and then you execute the jump. The same thing when you're doing a spin, you usually twist your arms on the opposite direction and you extend the leg to the direction you're going to spin. So these kind of movements, they bring a lot of reality to the animation and improves your movement. Staging, I was unsure if I would put this in 3D because it's more about like actually it's used in 3D but not in gameplay like it is for an emote, for example, because it's about creating a setup where your poses can tell a story from a beautiful angle. It's more about composition in a scene. But I think what we can translate to the emote creation is having poses that are beautiful. So when you're creating an emote, just don't like, you gotta do a pose that is appealing and that is easy to read, and it has some power in itself. So usually, well, when we are working with body mechanics or shots or 3D animation in general, we usually have only the silhouette of the character. That's why I had in this GIF the character all black, because you don't get like uh, your attention is only in the silhouette, and you can see if it has a beautiful silhouette, if you can identify what's going on without any additional details. So straight ahead action and pose to pose, this is also a lot. It's more important in 2D than in 3D because there are two ways to do it in 2D. The straight ahead is like you keep drawing every pose in every frame. And then there is pose to pose where you're going to do a main pose and then later on you're going to do a second pose and then you later add the in-betweens. In 3D, we don't have to worry about it. We usually work with pose to pose because the software is going to interpolate these middle poses. And if you want, you just go and adjust the pose in the middle. So this is not something to worry about, but it's nice to know how the software works. So the software for 3D animation is always pose to pose. Follow through and overlapping action. These techniques make movements more realistic because gives you the impression that it follows the laws of physics. Physics is very important in animation. I mean, you're going to see in many of these principles that is they are always trying to reproduce what we have in real world in regards to physics and how the body reacts to gravity and speed and all that. So the follow through is, for example, you have a hair, a long hair or a cloak or something that is dragging, and it because of the inertia, it moves like with a little delay from the main movement, let's say. So for example, if you start spinning, your body will start spinning first, and then the hair will follow. And if you stop all of a sudden, the hair will continue moving until it reaches its peak, and then it stops. So it's pretty much like a bell, where the main structure of the bell is going to one side and the other, and then the thing in the middle will bounce with a little delay, creating the sound. The overlapping is the tendency of body parts moving at different rates. For example, if you like when you walk, your arms will go in a certain speed and your legs will go in a different speed. This creates some offset because moving every part in the same speed is very mechanical and will make your animation look very robotic. So it's important, like the overlapping is important to offset these body parts or whatever parts, like clothing or any details, that gives a lot more life, brings more life into your animation. And slow in, slow out, I added here the example of the pendulum because, as you can see, these two spheres, they are moving the same distance and they have the same number of frames. But you can see that the first one looks very boring and mechanical, and the second one, it has this like speeding. It starts very slow and speeds up and then starts slowing down. So this is pretty much what it is, like slow in and slow out. Know that the movement doesn't start at full speed. It starts low and then it gathers speed and then it deaccelerates again until it reaches stop position. This is very useful for creating motions like spins, because if you try to spin yourself, you'll see that you have a little delay at first and then you gather full speed, and when you're reaching the end of the spin, you start losing the velocity. So this creates realistic animation. Okay, now about the arcs that I've mentioned, that poorly drawn arcs makes bad animation, and this is why natural actions tend to follow an arched path. The arc is one of the most important tools because it's pleasing to the eye. So when you see something, for example, I added here the clip with the belly dance animation and the arcs for the arms. And then, as you can see, like when it goes to the top of the head, it creates this beautiful arc. And when it goes down, it creates the arc again, which is very pleasing to the eye, and it creates fluid animation. Circular arcs make the movement organic, while angular ones are better for mechanic motion. So whatever you're doing, whatever the action is, you gotta make sure you have a beautiful motion with your arms or with your legs or with your torso or with your head. It's important to keep everything moving beautifully. So this is what actually brings fluidity to your animation. The secondary action is like a detail that you add in your main animation. For example, in here, like the tapping of the foot, the tapping of the hand gives this idea that he's anxious, or the other one while he's typing and he like cleans the sweat from his forehead. It gives the idea, the impression that he has some urgency and he's desperate. He's struggling with something. So secondary action is the action that it doesn't steal the attention from the main movement, but it adds to it. For example, you can have a walk cycle and then have the hands in the pockets, or maybe you have a walk cycle where the character is whistling and moving the head. So these kind of things, they add more dynamism to your animation. And remember that these secondary animations, they shouldn't like take away the attention from the main movement, but add to it in a way that creates more natural and um, more natural movement and something more genuine, like, for example. Okay, now moving on to the timing. I think this is what people struggle most with. Time animation is all about timing, because timing will define not only the duration of the action, but the speed and the weight and the strength and the velocity. So everything in the end is about timing. I've selected like these three spheres. They are just, they have the same length, the clips have the same number of frames. The distance is the same, but as you can see, the timing is how you space the frames, like the spacing between the frames. So if you have a frame closer to the other, you might have a result different if you bring the frame further from the previous one. And this is what I wanted to show with these two GIFs in here, is that just adjusting the spacing between the frames can change completely your animation. Even if it has the same number of frames, even if it's moving the same distance, you can have completely different results. And this is what gives personality to your animation. And not only that, but also, as you can see on the jumping one, when the timing is off, the character feels a lot heavier, the animation feels weird. So it's very subtle, but this is what I was talking about when I say that the eye can identify this kind of movements. The animation on the the jump animation on the left is much more fluid than the one on the right that feels stiffer and heavier, and that's all because of timing, how you adjust the frames in your timeline. Next one, exaggeration. Reality is boring. If you're going to stick like uh, you have a reference and you're going to reproduce that exactly as it is in 3D, uh, you you get a very, I wouldn't even say realistic, because you're going to see it and you're going to find it very boring. So usually we exaggerate the movements a little more, you bend the back a little more, you stretch the character a little more, jump a little higher, extend the pose a little more, because reality is boring. And if you see something exactly as we see in reality, it's not going to be appealing. And that happens also with motion capture. A lot of people do motion capture, they have to clean it after and adjust things to make it more appealing and more interesting. So yeah, don't be worried to exaggerate in your animation, but keep in mind that the more you exaggerate, the more cartoony it's going to look like. So it all depends on the feeling that you wanna get with this animation. And of course your style, because some people, it's part of their style having a more cartoony animation, and other people have a more realistic approach, but it's up to each one. Solid drawing is also very important in 2D, and I wouldn't say that much in 3D, but we could like translate this concept as knowledge of anatomy and how to pose properly when you have weight, how you distribute weight when you're having a pose, because you gotta have a clear silhouette. You gotta know you have. It's important to have this notion of anatomy and how the body bends, so you avoid any movement that might not look realistic. And it's important to understand how the body, the human body or whatever, the animal body or whatever you're trying to animate, it, you gotta know, have a clear idea of what is expected in a pose like that. So I added this yoga pose in here because it shows like how the weight shifts to the leg when it's going to do this lotus flower, and it's very subtle, but you can see the weight shifting from one side to the other because that's how it is in real life, and it's respecting the laws of physics. You can't like just stand in one of your legs and not shift the weight. So I would say that solid drawing in 3D is about that. About knowing the right balance and having a clear silhouette. Um, I think appeal is the last one. Appeal is charisma. And I think you can tell a lot about a character in the way it moves and if it's confident or not, if it's shy or sexy, or if it's angry or happy. It all depends on how you animate. And through the movement, you can um, show the viewer what the character is feeling, what is this character's personality, what is this character's intention. So that happens a lot with an emote. What do you want to? What's the impression you want to give with that emote? What emotion you want to convey with that emote? You want to be sexy. You want to be childish. You want to be cute, or you want to be super like angry or strong or confident. This has to be very clear in your animation. This is what makes the difference, like the appeal of the character and how it approaches the viewer. Okay, so I think we went through all the principles of animation. I think it's very important before you start an animation. You plan when you're planning it in your head. Try to remember what are the concepts of animation, what's important to keep in mind. I think always the laws of physics are very important to take into consideration when you're animating, even if you're animating something, for example, um, like in purpose and outer space with zero gravities, like movement. You gotta do it consciously, not because you just did it and it didn't work out and you don't know how to fix it. You at least you can, knowing these principles of animation, you can just say, okay, I think the problem is the timing, or maybe the problem, I don't know, is the is the overlapping animation, which is usually the issue. Is there like timing and the of follow through and overlapping are usually the most challenging ones to get right. But it's hard. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, and you're not going to. It goes through practice. Practice makes perfect. But at least if you keep these concepts in mind while you're trying to animate something, this will help you a lot and improve a lot of the quality of your animation, much more than just learning the software itself. But the software is important as well because it's the tool. And in here, I've separated 4 of the tools that, at least for me, are the most important ones when it comes to animation. So I'm gonna show in Blender each one, how it works, because this is a little more technical. So I think it's important to show how it works. First one is the rig. It's the most important tool for an animator. It's the one you spend most of your time working with because the rig is a tool and it has all these controls and everything. So it's important that you get to know this tool before animating. Search for the rig, try to see what control does what, if there's any uh, interesting properties, for example, if it has IK or FK, and if you can switch between them, if it has like a hip that moves in a certain independent way, or just try experimenting with the rig because you're going to spend most of your time. This is the utmost tool for the animator. I won't go into a lot of detail in here because there is a documentation that covers the rig a lot. And like I said, the rig itself is very technical. The concept is very technical, explaining what part does what. It's going to take a lot of time, so I don't want to like bother you with all this unnecessary information for now because we already have this in the documentation. So let's move on to the action editor, and I'm going to show you in Blender how it works. You're going to see the browse action, which is this option in here, but I'm going to show you in Blender. The summary only shows selected, duplicating and deleting animations. So let's move to Blender. Here it is. In case you don't know, this here is the symbol for the dope sheet. And in the dope sheet, you have the dope sheet, but we don't use it. We are going to use the action editor because this is going to show all your frames. Each dot in here, each of these points in here is a keyframe. And this here is the browse action menu. I've chose this one because later I'm gonna share with you the process for my process for animating, and I wanted you to share with you the 19 versions of the belly dance emote. But before we go through that, each of these dots is a keyframe, and when you select and you click on the summary, it's going to expand and show which control is this one. So when you expand the control, you're going to see all the parameters that has been keyframed. So usually it's X location, Y location, then depending on your rotation mode, which is in here, let me just, rotation mode is here. This is the rotation mode. It's usually quaternion, but for certain body parts, it should be Euler. So all these parameters, when you press the button to create a keyframe, it's creating a keyframe on everything. So in the action editor, you're going to see all of these and which of the parameters has been keyframed in which frame. So it can be a little overwhelming, but it's very necessary and it's a really good tool. Something important to keep in mind is if you toggle the only show selected. Usually it's like this for default, and this is going to show all the controls. So if you select any of, for example, I just want this hip control in here, and it's going to show for everybody. So if I'm to delete this, it's going to delete all the other controls too, which I don't want to. I want only to delete the hip. So I toggle the only show selected, and it's going to show me only the keyframes for the hip. And if I'm going to delete, for example, this one in here, it doesn't delete everything, but only that certain keyframe. For duplicating animations, I think this is very important because I don't want editing always the same animation. Because first, you might do something over that was already nice and you might regret it, and then there's no way to get it back unless you saved another version of Blender. But another thing that is cool to have duplicated animations is because you can copy and paste. You can copy little chunks of your animation and paste it and have a better result in the end. So if you end up regretting something, or if you want to just try something without messing your original animation, you can just click here in this new action. It's going to duplicate it. And now if I want to edit this in any way, I don't lose the original animation. I just have it, for example, I duplicated the belly dance sway with grace, and now I have belly dance sway with grace 001. And I can keep duplicating this as much as I want to preserve the original animation. So, and to delete the animation, it's pretty simple. You just have to press Shift and click on the X in here. And when you check, it probably, yes, it's showing a 0 next to the animation. And that means that if you save the file and open it again, the the animation will be gone. It won't be saved. Make sure you click here on the shield to save your animations. So I think we are ready to go to the graph editor. I myself think the graph editor is a much better tool than the actual action editor because you have access to the curves. I think this is a little more advanced when it comes to animation, and it can be very tedious. I myself, for example, when I started animating, I would never check my curves, and thus I would get some weird results, and I didn't know how to fix them because some weird results can only be fixed through the curves. I'm going to show you how this works. The curves, editing the curves, the interpolation mode, and the handle type. I think this is super technical, so might be a little boring for some of you, but I think it's important to talk about all these tools because they're very important in animation. So I'm going to show how all the curves look for this animation right now. It's like this. So every curve, every black dot that you see in here is a keyframe, and every curve represents something. So usually what's red is related to the x-axis, what is green is related to the y-axis, and what is blue is related to the z. So for example, if I pick here the upper body control, I can toggle on and off. And if I can choose which ones I want to show. For example, I want to show the X location only. And then I can edit the curves in here, pretty much like you edit anything in Blender. So you can, for example, select the keyframe that you want, use grab to grab it around. You can press G and, for example, Y to move it in the Y-axis. Same is for scaling. You can scale it in X, for example, and you can rotate. So this is how you edit the curves, but there's more to it because there is some interesting interpolation modes that will add or create something very interesting for your animation. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So for example, if you right click in here and you can see the interpolation mode, you can see everything in here like constant, linear, and Bezier. Usually the default is Bezier when we always do it in Bezier, but you can see the difference. For example, this is Bezier. Let me just hide this. So you can see the difference in animation. If I change it to linear, you're gonna see that the curves now are just straight lines, and the character feels like it doesn't have this ease in and out of the curve. And there's also another option that is constant, that it removes completely the interpolation, so you only see a sequence of keyframes that you created. And this is really good for creating robotic movement or during the animation process if you want to create like a blocking phase where you just want to see those specific keyframes that you created. Okay, so let's go back to Bezier. I'm going to show you the handle type because it's sometimes you want to adjust this. Let's just get back to the X location one. The handle, you can see that every keyframe has this handle that can be manipulated, like rotating it to create different effects on the curve. If the curve is pretty much like this, what is going to happen is take some time, accelerates a lot, and then deaccelerates, slows down. If you do it like this, for example, it's quite the opposite. So you can just play around with your curves and adjust the effect that you want to give. But something nice is that you can change this handle type. For example, you can have it free. When you set it to free, you can like manipulate one side, and let me pick this one side and the other separated to create a different effect on your curve. So This is the effect that you can create when you have like a free handle manipulation. And also there's other like types too. I usually what I myself personally, the ones I use the most is free or auto clamped. Vector is pretty much like if you wanna, but you can do that with the linear interpolation too. If you want to have something going in a straight line, like having constant speed, you usually want this kind of handle and the linear interpolation. But I want to show you something that you might have had this before when you try to animate. Is I'm going to grab in here. I'm going to duplicate this animation. It's for the handle. Sometimes we have the first and the last. I'm going to do this in here. For example, second, I'm going to go with the X location. So I have the first keyframe and the last one. If I rotate this one and I copy and paste it in here, you see the frame is exactly the same, but it creates this weird curve that shouldn't be happening because the first frame is exactly the same as the last. So how do you fix this? You don't have to manually try to go and fix the rotation of the handle. If you're having weird stuff that you don't know why they are happening, you can just like click here, click handle, auto clamped, and boom, it fixes you. So now the animation works properly. If you're ever having this kind of situation where the frame is exactly, the first is exactly the same as the last, and something weird is happening in between, you must check it because it's probably the curves, and you can like just choosing the proper handle type, you can fix this without any further problems. So I think we covered everything for the graph editor. Moving on to my favorite tool ever, Blender. This is an incredible tool because it's going to help you see the arcs in your animation, and not only the arc, but also the timing. So I'm going to show you in Blender how this works. I mean, in this GIF, you can see where you can find this tool, but I'm going to show in the file the magic that it does. So I'm going to select it. Let me hide this. I don't want this one showing. Not this one either. Okay. So I'm going to select the hand bone. I'm going to put it up here. And under object data properties, there's the motion path. Just click it. You can choose like manual range and select each what frames you want, because if I just calculate the 300 ones, it's going to be a lot. Going to show you everything, the path that this bone is doing through the animation. Let me just go back to this version. Okay, so it's going to show the path that the bone is doing through the animation. So you can check if your arcs are looking good or not. This is usually helpful if you choose like bones for the hands or the bones for the head, because, or the feet, because this is the extremities, it's going to show better arcs. So for example, in here you can see the movement that the hand is doing when it goes up, and it goes up very slow. So you can see that the frames are very close to each other. Even through many frames, they stay very close. For example, in here it's 105 and in here is 114, and they just move this distance. On the other hand, there is another part where the hands are going to move in a faster way. So here in the beginning, you can see that at this part of the animation, You see that the frames are very far away from each other. It's not very curved because the more speed you add, the flatter the arcs will be. So you can see it has an arc anyways, because you can see that the shape that this is creating. And if you don't like it, for example, I don't like this frame here, let's say, yeah, let's go to the 114, for example. I don't like how this is looking. I can just adjust it in here, and the arc automatically adapts to what you're trying to do. So this is a pretty good tool to keep track of your arcs and your timing, because you can visualize that when it's very slow, the frames are going to be very close to each other, and when it's really fast, the frames are going to be very far away from each other. So finally, I'm going to show a little of my process, my creation process with you. I, throughout the years, developed my own. I'll tell you how it's usually done. First, people usually do the blocking, and it's just like creating the main poses, and then they do the spline, which is like creating the interpolation, and then they go to the polishing and all that. But I'll tell you how I usually work. And now I'm going to talk about the 19 versions of the belly dance. It's even like the belly dance Desert Reverie, because I imported the animation and edited on top of what I already have. So just edit this in here. This is what it looked like in the first version. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to start with a spin, so I just like test with things. And I didn't like it because the spin was going to be super fast. So I gave up on that idea. I usually go for the hips first. I just pose the arms to have an idea, but you'll see that I don't animate the arms much. So I decided to start with this, then I moved on to another one and added the hips, but as you can see, it's a little broken. Only this part is moving and not the others. The upper body has very little animation to it. The head is very stiff. Foot is not posed in here. As you can see, it's like the heel is up in here. So this kind of polishing is I always leave to the end. And there's another version where I added a little more. Something I like to add in here is usually when I do emotes, I have them in blocks. For example, the belly dance one, I do the first part, which would be, let me get the original one. The first part will be like this. It ends here. So I usually animate this block first. When I get the movement right, I move on to the next part. But I don't polish everything until I have the whole sequence ready. So in here, I added a little more to the animation. And as you can see, the timing was very slow. I was trying to get the movement right before fixing the timing. It felt very slow and it out of rhythm. So I kept on experimenting with that until I got a good result. Something also that I did was, for example, very fluid movements. I created a clip just for that, which is the camel step. So I created a clip with that, and then I kept on adjusting this particular movement until I got it how I wanted. And then I just copied and pasted it on the whole animation. So this is how I do it. I usually animate the foot and the hip, and I keep moving on to the upper body and the arms. And you see, like, the arms are the last things that I've animated, because you can see the hand here is very stiff. Arms do something here, but you can see that's very bouncy. Head is very stiff. And then through the 19 versions of the Sway with Grace, I ended up like getting to where I wanted. But as you can see, the arms are usually the last thing. Arms and fingers are the last things that I polish. So this is my process. I do hips because movement starts from the hip and feet. Then I move on to getting the movement right, the block of the emote right. Then I keep adding upper body. Then I keep adding arms. Usually the arms are when everything else is ready. And then when the arms is ready, I check my arcs. Let's say I want to see this hand. I use the motion path to help me visualize if the hand is doing a proper movement. Usually I do this with the head to see if the head is bouncing or bumping or not. And then I give the final polishing. And that's it. To finish, I wanted to give you some animation tips. First, related to habits, and then related to techniques. As for habits, I think make research a habit. Always search for reference. Reference is everything. If you can't find anything and you can't reproduce the movement yourself, you can always record yourself trying to do it. Observe real life people around you. Observe how people move, how people interact with each other, how they express their emotions. Like I said, try reproducing the movement if you can to feel the mechanic in your body and understand if the weight is shifting, how much it's shifting, which leg should be on the front, which leg should be on the back. Sometimes we imagine the movement works in a certain way, and when you try to reproduce it, you can't because physically impossible to do it. So it's nice to keep, if you try to feel this movement and everything, like these details, it helps you a lot. I would say for people who are starting with animation now, I would say to keep it simple at first. It's better to have something simple and well polished than to have something very complex and very messed up. I would also suggest studying the effects of gravity and the laws of physics. You have to pay attention to that because that's what gives your that's what makes your animation believable. And practice makes perfect. No one was born an animator. I wasn't born an animator. No one knows anything until they try and learn and practice and practice. And practice makes perfect. And something very important for animation is fresh eyes. Sometimes, like, just you animate it a little bit, just close Blender or go do something else completely different, and you come back with fresh eyes to check your animation. You probably end up finding stuff that you didn't notice before, and you might identify something that needs improvement, or you maybe see that you changed something and the previous version was better. So these are the things related to habit. For techniques, I would say animate from different perspectives. Like, I'm going to even show Blender in here. Usually I go front and side, but always like try the perspective, watch the animation from the top. It looks good from the front, from the back, and even perspective. I keep rotating my, my characters all the time to see if the weight and the balance is right. So that's for animating from different perspectives. Don't stick to only one, it's going to mess your animation. Never edit the same animation clip. Like I said, keep duplicating so you don't lose your progress, or if you add something that you don't like, you always have the original one to go back to, and you can always copy and paste clips, like chunks of animation, to make the whole animation clip better. FK it gives you better arcs. I know a lot of people who are starting, they prefer IK because it's easier to pose, and that's true. But for hands, I mean, arcs, you can have good arcs with IK. You have to keep adding a keyframe to every single frame to get the arc right. So if you, there are certain situations where you should use IK, and it's not often. IK we usually use if you want something to stick and don't move. So if you want the hand to stick on top of the table, or you're doing like push-ups or something like that. But try experimenting with FK because it gives you better arcs. Don't leave bones unposed. Don't overuse keyframes unless it's very necessary, because as I showed you, like, the software has its own interpolation system, and it usually does a very good job. So trust it. Unless it's not doing a good job, then you should manually go and add your keyframes. But if they are not needed, don't overuse them. Watch out for IK popping. I'm going to show you what IK popping is when you grab your character too much and the knee pops, like it's super. I'm going to show you the form bonds too, so you can understand. It's super like straight, almost to a point that it hurts. And this is very noticeable in animation because, like you see, if the bones are properly positioned, it should bend a little bit. And this kind of pop, it's very noticeable in animation. So watch out whenever you're working with IK. Don't let this happen. Don't let this happen. And add speed variation. Like I said, make your animation interesting. Don't make it boring, like having everything on the same speed or having like zero gravity, like your character is moving in slow motion. That is pretty boring. Add some dynamism to it. Add speed to certain parts and leave other parts moving slower to create more dynamism. And use motion paths, my favorite tool. And that's it. I hope you all enjoyed it. I hope this was useful for you, these animation tips and these principles of animation. I think, I hope this can help you creating better animations. And yeah, that's it. I think if you have any questions, now is the time.
I see somebody had a question and asked if you had any tips on mocap, if you've messed with like mocap suits much before.
Like I said, my expertise is keyframe animation. I'm not, I mean, I don't have a lot of experience with motion capture. And so it's a completely different universe because you need a different software for capturing, then you need to retarget bones and all that. That's a completely different process, even though, like I said, even motion capture need like this kind of polishing, and you're probably gonna need to apply these principles of animation to your motion capture clip. But yeah, that's not my expertise. I can't talk much about motion capture. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. Yeah, Nikki asking about NLA tracks. So the thing is, there's no need to use NLA tracks that much, I would say, unless like you're having many different objects doing different things. You can, everything you can do in an NLA tracks, you can do like with manipulating the curves and duplicating the keyframes and all that. So yeah, NLA tracks can be tricky because this should have a whole other workshop on them because there are some kind of things like if you click on them, they are working. If they're not in a certain color, they are not working. And it can be very frustrating, I would say. So I usually don't use them that much personally because, like I said, that's very specific situation for if you have many different objects doing the same thing, one export, a single animation clip. I think the NLA tracks are super useful. But other than that, I think anything like if you want to like stretch your animation, you can just like select your frames in the action editor, leave the cursor on the first frame, select all the frames and press scale, and you like scale all the animation through the timeline. There's no need to do that through the NLA tracks. So actually, I know what you're saying. I mean, you have a vehicle with two animations. You don't have to worry about the NLA tracks. You just have to push these animations to the NLA tracks so they are exported. All the animations are exported together because sometimes Blender is crazy and it exports only the animation that is selected. So just to show you real quick in here, for example, you have the animation selected belly dance. Let's say what's in the nonlinear. There's a lot of things in here because it's saved all the versions. But for example, if it wasn't, and you have like a couple animations, you just select, for example, this one and press push down and it goes to the NLA tracks. If you want to export multiple animations, you just do that. Select the animation, push down, and then export everything, and it should work. No big mystery with the NLA tracks in here. Don't mess with that too much because it can be crazy. Yes, you can. You can keep on editing the animation in here. And if you want to delete it from the nonlinear tracks, you just delete it as delete. If you can delete it, it's because it's locked. So just unlock and delete everything. But I think when you edit the animation, it automatically updates in the NLA tracks too. So you just keep, like, you can delete and push them down again, or just keep uh, editing the animation. No big deal. Sure thing. And something I would like to say, if you guys ever have any questions related to animation, or if you're having trouble with your emotes, just reach out to me and I'll try to help you if I can. And yeah, feel free to message me with your animation questions whenever you have them. I'm happy to help and try to figure out. If I don't know the solution, I'm happy to uh, try to figure out a solution. Oh, thank you,
Awesome.
CK. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy you guys enjoyed the workshop. I think this is very, at least for me, it was very fun to make, and I think knowledge is best when it's shared. I'm all about sharing the knowledge and the tips. I'm not the kind of person that, no, that I'm keeping this. This is my secret technique. I don't like that. I'm super transparent. I can share everything that I've got to learn through all my years as an animator. I'm happy to share with you all. Hopefully, this is helpful for you and you had a good time. And yeah, I see you guys in the Decentraland.